You know that nap your toddler takes on the plane? The one you're so grateful for? Well, what if I told you that very nap could be the direct cause of the epic, world-ending meltdown you're going to face after landing? It's because at 35,000 feet, their little brain is often skipping the most important, most emotionally balancing part of sleep. It's a wild truth about air travel that almost nobody talks about, but it explains, well, it explains everything. So, you've just landed. You're exhausted, but you did it. You survived. You look over at your toddler who slept for a solid chunk of the flight, and you think, okay, they should be rested, right? But nope. Instead, you get this, a full-blown, scorched earth meltdown over a cracker that fell on the floor, or because you handed them the blue cup instead of the red one. If this scene gives you flashbacks, you are in exactly the right place. Welcome to Sleepedia, a corner of the internet dedicated to the science of sleep and circadian rhythms. Today, we're going to solve this travel mystery, once and for all. I mean, seriously, if that sounds familiar, you are not alone. And I need you to hear this. This is not just your toddler being cranky. It's not them being difficult or you being a bad parent. It's a very real, very specific neurological thing happening inside their brain because of the flight itself. This isn't about behavior, it's about biology. And once you get the biology, you can totally change the outcome. So let's break down what is really going on up there. So let's dive into our first section, the post-flight meltdown mystery. And we call it a mystery because for so many of us, it makes no sense. You packed the snacks, you downloaded the shows, you did everything right, but you still get this massive explosion at the end. Why are these tantrums so much more intense than the regular, everyday ones? Well, the answer actually has a name. The culprit is something called altitude fatigue. Now, to be super clear, this isn't just about being tired or having jet lag. It's way more specific. It's a deficit in one particular stage of sleep, REM sleep, the dreaming stage. So why does this happen? Well, an airplane cabin is pressurized, right? But it's only pressurized to feel like you're on top of a mountain, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 feet high. The air is just thinner. There's less oxygen in every breath. Now, for us adults, it's usually not a big deal. But for a toddler's brain, which is developing like crazy, this little bit of oxygen stress sends a huge signal. It basically tells the brain, hey, conditions aren't perfect up here. Let's switch to survival mode. And as you're about to see, the brain's idea of survival sleep is very, very different from the kind of restful sleep they get at home. So that brings us to our next section, unmasking altitude fatigue, or why those plane naps are such a bait and switch. Because from the outside, it looks great. Your kid is passed out, you're finally getting a moment of peace, maybe you're even watching a movie. It feels like a total win. But inside their brain, that thin air is forcing a completely different kind of sleep, one that's not emotionally restorative at all. Check this out. This comparison makes it so clear. On the right, you've got a normal nap in a crib. The brain cycles through all the sleep stages. It gets deep sleep for physical repair, and it gets REM sleep to process all the day's feelings and memories. It's a complete package. But now look at the left side. At 35,000 feet, that mild oxygen stress makes the brain go into triage mode. It thinks, okay, resources are a little tight, let's focus on the absolute essentials. That means it prioritizes deep sleep for physical stuff. But to get that extra time for deep sleep, it has to steal it from somewhere. And it steals it from REM sleep. So the brain basically skips the entire emotional processing part of the nap. It's like taking your car in for an oil change, but telling the mechanic to just ignore the flat tire. And this is my favorite analogy because it explains the problem perfectly. Think of REM sleep as the brain's dishwasher. All day long, your toddler is piling up dirty dishes. All the little frustrations, the no's they hear, the confusing moments. Deep sleep might repair the kitchen, but it's REM sleep that actually runs the dishwasher, scrubbing all those emotional experiences clean and putting them away neatly. Without that dishwasher cycle, all that gunk just stays piled up in the sink. And for toddlers, this is a massive deal, and this chart shows you why. Their brains spend way more time in REM sleep than ours do, up to 30% of their total sleep. Why? Because their whole life is just a fire hose of new information. They're learning to walk, talk, figure out how the world works, all at the same time. They desperately need that extra dishwasher time, so when a flight takes that away from them, the impact is huge. They are just so much more vulnerable to this than we are. So what's actually happening in their brain when REM sleep gets skipped? Well, a few things. First, the brain's normal daily cleanup crew doesn't show up, so things get mentally cluttered. Second, the amygdala, that's the brain's little emotional alarm system. It goes on high alert. It gets super reactive. So a tiny problem like a misplaced cracker suddenly feels like a 5-alarm fire. And third, and this is the big one, the part of their brain that acts as the emotional brakes temporarily goes offline. They literally, physiologically, cannot pump the brakes on their frustration. It's not that they won't, it's that they can't. They are all gas, no brakes. Now, it turns out that not all flights are going to have the same effect. The length of your flight is a huge factor in how bad the altitude fatigue gets, which brings us right into our next section, the flight time factor. Basically, the longer you're in the air, the deeper that REM sleep debt becomes, and the bigger the meltdown's going to be when you land. Let's look at these thresholds, because this is super practical. On flights under 4 hours, you might just notice your toddler is a little extra fussy or whiny. They can usually bounce back pretty quick. But once you cross that 8-hour mark for a long-haul flight, altitude fatigue is pretty much a guarantee. It's not a maybe anymore, it's an expectation. At that point, you're entering what scientists call a behavioral recovery period. That means you have to plan for it. It's a biological debt, and it has to be paid back. So that was a lot of science, and it might sound a little bleak, but I promise this is where it gets good, because knowing this stuff is your superpower. Now we get to the solution. Section 4, your altitude action plan. Because when you know it's coming, you can prepare for it. You can stop being reactive and start being proactive. We're going to walk through a simple 3-phase plan: pre-flight, mid-flight, and post-flight. Phase 1 is all about what you do before you even leave the house. First, hydration. Start hydrating your little one a full 24 hours before the flight. When we're dehydrated, our blood gets thicker and it's harder to deliver oxygen where it needs to go. So by making sure they're well hydrated, you're basically tuning up their oxygen delivery system for the main event. Second, protect the airway. Cabin air is insanely dry, and it can irritate their tiny nasal passages, making it just a little harder to breathe. A simple saline nasal spray before you take off keeps everything clear and reduces that subtle stress on their system. Easy peasy. So what happens if your toddler wakes up mid-flight and they're already losing it? That's the REM deficit talking. You can't reason with them. You have to go straight to their nervous system. A cool cloth on the back of their neck or even a tiny sip of cold water can act like a physiological reset button. It just kind of shocks their system out of that panic loop. And never, ever underestimate the power of deep pressure. A really firm, tight hug or squishing them under a blanket sends a powerful signal to their brain that says, you are safe, you are held. It helps counteract that out-of-control feeling. All right, this phase is probably the most important of all. For the first 2 days after a long flight, you have to respect the 48-hour recovery window. This is not the time to go to a theme park or a huge family dinner. You have to lower the cognitive load. Think quiet time, familiar foods, and zero pressure. And here's a big one. Resist the urge to put them to bed super early. It seems like it would help, but it can actually mess up their internal clock even more. Stick to your normal, calming bedtime routine. That sense of normalcy will signal to their brain that it's safe to finally catch up on all that lost REM sleep. It's a process called REM rebound, and you have to give their brain the space to do it. And that brings us to our final section, a new travel mindset. Because honestly, after all the practical tips, the most powerful tool you have is simply changing how you see the situation. It's about getting that it's biology, not bad behavior. So the next time that meltdown is happening at baggage claim, I want you to repeat this to yourself like a mantra. This is a biological response to altitude, not a discipline issue. It's not them being naughty. It is a predictable physiological response to a stressful environment. Just reframing it like that is a total game changer. It lets you feel empathy instead of anger. It helps you respond with a calm hug instead of frustration. You become their safe place in the middle of their own internal storm. And that really is the big takeaway here. Understanding the science of altitude fatigue completely changes the game. It takes all the blame and the shame out of the equation. We can stop thinking we're bad parents, and we can stop thinking our kids are just being difficult. It's neither. It's just a hurdle. And when you can see the hurdle, you can plan for it. You can navigate the skies with a strategy, instead of just gritting your teeth and hoping for the best.